From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
In search of more power.
We can absorb more power than any vehicles today can produce. So we're planning for the future.
How what's learned in this lab will help power ag equipment of the future. Is Russia smuggling grain out of Ukraine? What one investigation has uncovered. And trouble for ag on the Mississippi.
The depth of the barge, and now they're even talking width of the barges, which I've never heard before.
How lower water levels are creating a logjam and higher prices right now on AgDay. Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. As if agricultural shippers did not have enough supply chain challenges to deal with, now another problem is emerging. There are growing problems on the inland waterway system that's impacting barge transportation. AgDay's Michelle Rook reports that many warn the problems will only grow worse as the harvest season rolls on.
Clinton, due to the scarcity of precipitation throughout the year, the water depth along U.S. waterways is limiting the efficiency of barge transportation in two ways: channel depth and channel width. For farmers, that can negatively impact cash basis levels and their ability to export during and after harvest. Low water levels on the Mississippi River could slow U.S. exports, particularly the area south of St. Louis. Barge companies are having to load barges lighter to prevent groundings, which have already occurred.
1 foot less of water level will result in you having to lighter load that barge with 5,000 fewer bushels of soybeans. So when you consider that a single barge can accommodate easily 50,000 bushels of soybeans, you're looking at a 10% reduction.
The width of the barges is also down from the normal 40 to a maximum of 25. This is a concern for farmers like Mike Horth, who are in the midst of harvest.
Yeah, the depth of the barge, and now they're even talking width of the barges, which I've never heard before. But they're going to have to go narrower, and because the water level is so low that, they don't want to ground them. You ground one of them, you got problems.
Steenhoek says with the lower volume, the barges have to make more turns, and that has pushed freight rates up over last fall as well.
From this period this year from last year, barge rates have increased 41% if you're loading a barge in the middle part of the Mississippi River between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and St. Louis.
Slowing barge traffic is already having an impact on cash grain prices, and soybean basis around St. Louis plummeted last week.
You saw bean basis go down 50 to 60 cents, depending on which terminal you were talking about. There's a lot of issues because you can't float barges if they're full, down the river. And with that being the case, it just increases costs for everyone to move less bushels.
And basis could be impacted for some time.
We could see basis definitely get wider if they don't see any relief, and I don't think they will.
And unfortunately, precipitation over the next month is expected to be limited, further exacerbating the shipping challenges and export concerns. USDA's export inspections on a weekly basis will be the key thing to watch in the weeks ahead to see how much the low river water levels are impacting new crop export shipments from the United States.
All right, thanks, Michelle. A new session of the Supreme Court is underway, and on the first day of the High Court, a key ag case, hearing oral arguments and a challenge to the Clean Water Act or Waters of the U.S. Now, the case comes after the Supreme Court ruled in June the EPA had overstepped its authority under the Clean Air Act to cut gas emissions from power plants. The case before the court centers on a long-running dispute involving an Idaho couple. A decision from the court isn't expected until next year. Days after Hurricane Ian ripped a deadly path through Florida, producers are left with a big task when it comes to cleanup. Right now, some communities don't even have the basics like power or running water. Florida Farm Bureau reports farmers and ranchers are facing widespread destruction of crops, buildings, and fencing due to high winds and water. In areas of the citrus belt, it says there's been significant fruit drop from the trees, and livestock and dairy farms are also impacted here. Officials report that farmers as far north as St. Augustine are facing flooded vegetable fields. As Florida recovers from Hurricane Ian, we're continuing to watch more storms developing in the tropics. Meteorologist Andrew Whitmire joins us with the very latest.
Yes, just like we talked about yesterday, we continue to watch tropical depressions that are likely going to form across the parts of the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, 2 of them are likely going to form here as we go throughout the next coming days. The good news, though, is the impacts to the United States is not really looking likely here, as we're going to be kind of watching a trough that's going to develop across the east coast, and that's going to kind of push everything away from the United States. You see that taking note here on the jet stream later on in this week. Notice that dip there across the Great Lakes as well as the northeast and mid-Atlantic states. Again, that's going to help push everything away from the U.S., which is good news, as again, we do not need any tropical disturbances to come back into the lower 48. What we're watching here is a strong ridge that's going to develop across the western half of the U.S. It's going to bring with it well above average temperatures to parts of the Pacific Northwest. And then as we take a look at the mid and latter half of this week, we're watching a sharp cold front that's going to increase cold temperatures across the Great Lakes and northern plains. And that's going to bring with it the chance of some widespread freeze and frost potential to several portions of the northern half of the U.S. And check out this adorable picture shared by Stephanie Miller. Stephanie says this is Trent Miller and his son Nolan. She calls it a farmer and his little farmer in Walnut Grove, Missouri. A beautiful picture and a terrific memory captured. Oh, more in your Ag Day forecast in just a few minutes.
Is Russia stealing Ukrainian grain? An investigation by the Associated Press and the PBS series Frontline says it is indeed happening. The Associated Press says the operation used falsified manifests and seaborne subterfuge to steal Ukrainian grain worth at least $530 million. AP and Frontline using satellite imagery and marine radio transponder data to track 36 ships making more than 50 voyages carrying grain from Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine to ports in the Middle East. They report the ongoing theft is being carried out by wealthy businessmen and state-owned companies in Russia and Syria. Some of them already face financial sanctions from the United States and European Union. Legal experts say the theft is a potential war crime.
Win the Furrow programming on Ag Day is brought to you by In-Furrow leader FMC. Visit your FMC retailer or infurrow.ag.fmc.com to learn more.
This week, we're focusing on some of the agronomic ideas that can help you win the furrow next season. Today, how to pump up yields by focusing on ear flex in corn. Here's Isaac Ferry.
So we never really want to walk away from a crop in season, and even if things have gone against us most of the season, some of these corn hybrids have so much potential in kernel depth and so much variation in kernel depth that there's a lot of yield to be made later in the season, even if the front half hasn't gone against us. So we know all ears flex, but they can flex in girth or rows around, they can flex in length, and they can flex in kernel depth. And some hybrids have a tendency to flex in certain areas over others. So maybe more likely to flex in girth, more likely to flex in length or depth than some others. And one of the things that we look at is trying to figure that out. And then once we figure that out, we know when it happens. So girth is being established somewhere in that V4, V6 time frame. Well, if we have a hybrid that's susceptible to flexing in girth, that V4, V6 time frame becomes very important. We want to make sure it has a good day. We don't want it to be deficient of any nutrients during that time frame. Getting it off to a good start, planting in good warm conditions, adding starter fertilizer are how we ensure that it doesn't flex downward during that stage. If we have a hybrid that predominantly flexes in kernel depth, that's happened the last 40 days of the season. So being on top of our late season in applications, making sure we have enough water, staying on top of the fungicide applications become pretty important, because that's when that hybrid is most susceptible to stress as we get to later seasons. So we want to do anything we can to mitigate stress during that time period, especially if that's where it's most susceptible to truncating yield overall. When we look at the hybrids flex, we always think of flex as flexing down. If we flex in length, we're flexing backwards. So we had a high genetic potential for that ear, and then as it's stressed, it starts limiting how long that ear is going to become. So low populations don't cause an ear to flex up. Low populations just allow that ear to get closer to what the genetic potential of that ear was to begin with, because we alleviated stress by reducing the populations. As we increase populations, we increase a little bit of stress in there, and then we'll start to truncate, whether it's rows around or whether it's length. Because we increase stress, it's going to start to work its way down. But flex kind of always happens on the downward movement, not the upward movement. And so that's flex could be associated with risk, right? So a high flex hybrid means under stress, it's going to start to move down. And if we have flex and girth, that's where our risk time is, right? That V4 to V6 is we have a risk of flexing down in girth, so we got to keep it happy.
All right, thanks, Isaac. Now, soybeans, they clawed back to make some gains in markets to start the week. We'll have more coming up in analysis. And later, testing out the latest and greatest in farm equipment from tires to tracks and everything in between. We'll take you inside a new lab in the country. Soybeans were higher to start the week. That's thanks to a surge in crude oil futures, which overshadowed USDA's higher than expected quarterly stocks report. AgDay's Michelle Rook joins us again with more.
A higher day on Monday in the markets with the exception of wheat. Alan Brugler with Brugler Marketing is here with analysis. And Alan, soybeans kind of led the charge higher. Did you feel like that was just kind of a corrective bounce because we maybe were down too hard last week?
Yeah, I think that's the main explanation for today's movement. You had a 40-some cent move in some of those contracts on Friday, and that was a pretty good, big reaction given the scale of the grain stock surprise at 274 million. You know, that was only a 30 million bushel surprise. Usually you'd have thought maybe 10, 15 cents at the most on that. It was aggravated, I think, by the month end and quarter end liquidation by some of the funds and the fact that bean oil was down pretty hard. But bean oil came back up today. Right, and some of that was following crude oil, which was risk on and kind of helped out the corn market as well, didn't it? Yeah, we saw a pretty good bounce this morning in crude oil. OPEC's making noises about a million barrel a day production cut to neutralize the U.S. liquidating its SPR. I think that provided a lift for biofuels in general. So corn got a little bit of an assist from that as well. And then wheat setback, was that just profit taking? I think so. You had a 45-cent gain on Friday. You hit multi week and even multi month highs on the wheat. We're still seeing a nice rally out of a seasonal low there. We did hit some of the initial retracement objectives, and that triggered the profit taking. And cattle and hogs both ended higher on Monday, and so was that just short covering because it looks like the funds have really liquidated a lot? Yeah, the funds lightened up those cattle quite a bit. The board got below the cash. Cash was 143. The board on Friday was a little below cash. We're thinking some better supported cash this week, and therefore the board could bounce. All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Alan Brugler with Brugler Marketing. And you can catch our full discussion at agweb.com. More Ag Day is coming up.
To talk to Alan about his ag market professional services, call Brugler Marketing and Management at 402-697-3623 or visit his website, www.bruglermarketing.com. Ag Day is brought to you by MetLife Investment Management's Agricultural Finance Group. MetLife Investment Management is positioned to help you grow your business with a competitive farm, ranch, and agribusiness loan. To learn more, visit investments.metlife.com/agriculture.
Meteorologist Andrew Whitmire joining us here, taking a look at, well, what could be the end of some growing season for folks, especially there in the northern plains.
Yeah, especially the northern plains, looking at a hard freeze later on this week, Friday morning, and the cold doesn't stop there. We're not talking a hard freeze for everyone, but we are talking a freeze, at least a light freeze, as well as some frost potential for most northern states as we round out this week and into next weekend. And we will be watching that hard freeze again moving from the northern plains, and that colder weather is going to continue to work its way down across the Great Lakes states, upper portions here of the Midwest. At least a light freeze to area-wide frost that can be expected where we do have those skies clearing on out Saturday morning, and by Sunday morning, that light freeze to an area-wide frost, depending on cloud cover, will work its way across the parts of the north and east, parts of Ohio, the Virginia states, Pennsylvania, New York, as well as Maine. Could be looking at, again, potential there for some damaging frost and maybe even a light freeze potential. And it's all thanks to this cold front that's going to kind of be working its way from the northern states here throughout midweek. And by Friday, that cold front's going to dip its way further to the south. High pressure is going to build up in from the north towards the south and east. And as that high pressure does begin to move on in, that will increase the potential there for clearer skies and bringing with it cooler temperatures as well. In fact, later on this week, much of the lower 48 is kind of going to be split here. Warmer weather off to our west as an upper level ridge builds in. Meanwhile, as the trough takes form here along the eastern coast, that's going to bring below average high temperatures later on this week to parts of the Midwest, Great Lakes, as well as parts of the mid-Atlantic states, all tapping in to some of that cooler weather. And as we take a look at precipitation here, no really big systems moving on through, just some very subtle systems here or there, bring with it some scattered chances of some moisture across parts of the area. Check out parts there, though, of the lower four corners there. Could be looking at some widespread precipitation for some parts of those areas. Meanwhile, take a look at the high temperatures for this afternoon, 70s and 60s. Meanwhile, 80s building on into the Plain States. 70s off towards the west coast. As we head towards Wednesday morning, we'll be watching some of that cooler weather trying to funnel on in across the northern states already. That will begin to seep on further south and east as we go into the latter half of this week and going forward into this weekend. That's a look around the country. Now let's take a look a little bit closer to home. Check out Bethlehem, New Hampshire. Morning frost, afternoon sunshine, high 60 degrees. Going down into Texas, mostly sunny, warm temperature into the lower 80s. And glowing up into Walhalla, North Dakota, sunny and mild, high 67.
AgDay, brought to you by Rumensin. Rumensin's quality, consistency, and efficiency make it the right choice for your cattle operation. Rumensin, trusted by generations.
Important information about dairy margin coverage payments. It's reported that payments under the program will be triggered for August for Tier 1, but no payments will be targeted for Tier 2. That's based on the difference between the national all milk price and the national average feed cost. The national average margin for August was $8.08 per hundredweight. That triggers Tier 1 payments for those with margin coverage levels of $8.50, $9, and $9.50. You see the payment rates on your screen for each level. And a big event for dairy is underway, World Dairy Expo. It's happening this week in Madison, Wisconsin. Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan will be there along with representatives from Farm Journal's Dairy Herd Management. So look for her reports later this week. And make sure to check out Farm Journal's Dairy Herd Management for a look at how dairy industry folks keep their operations going at home while also exhibiting at the expo. Because, as we know, dairy never stops. Getting the most out of your ag equipment. Get a sneak peek at a state-of-the-art lab in Iowa that's helping make it happen in the country. Iowa State University is on track to become a leader in the ag equipment industry, focusing on technology that's efficient. Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan gives us a sneak peek at a new lab on campus, not yet open to the public.
Welcome to the Off-Highway Vehicle Chassis Dynamometer Lab at Iowa State University.
Called Dyno Lab for short, this large lab is geared toward work with off-highway equipment, both agricultural and construction.
It's designed to measure the power that a vehicle can produce through its wheels onto the ground.
The interest is driven by making off-highway vehicles more efficient.
So we're interested in taking the fuel, measuring the fuel into the vehicle, and then understanding how well the vehicle does in converting that to useful propulsion energy.
The Dyno Lab can load and test different aspects of a vehicle.
These are the motors that are used to load the vehicle,
to understand where the power is going through it.
and they're able to load up to 600 horsepower for each corner.
As it acts almost like a souped-up treadmill, but with rollers.
This allows us to do studies of efficiency of converting that energy and the fuel into propulsive energy.
The first test run in the lab was done with an agricultural sprayer. What makes the Dyno Lab so special is the fact it's one of a kind in North America.
What makes it unique is its flexibility, its level of power that it's able to load to. There will be similar units inside of some companies. Some of the manufacturers will have that, but having something like that, this at a public institution, is pretty unique.
So just how much power can it handle? 100 megawatts worth.
That's like the power used for 1,000 homes. We can absorb more power than any vehicles today can produce. So we're playing for the future.
For a project that started just over 5 years ago, it's now on the edge of running on all cylinders soon.
We really want to be a leader in the ag equipment industry. in terms of developing new technology, being able to develop technology that's more useful for agriculture, and really moving the needle ahead on things like energy efficiency, functionality, all those things for agricultural machinery.
All right, thanks, Ty, and that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad to tune in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Davis. Have a great day.